Okay, so this is the Bible study for April 14th, 2021, and it's John chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. It says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we don't even know where you are going. So how can we know the way?" Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do not know him, or I'm sorry, from now on, you do know him and have seen him." Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been with you or among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father, and I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask for anything in my name, and I will do it." All right, so number one says, what just happened or was said that might cause their hearts, the hearts of the disciples to be troubled? So remember, we were studying at the end of chapter 13, and a couple of things have happened. One is he's been talking about his betrayal and Judas, and he tells them who it's going to be, and then Judas goes out and does it. Um, he tells them to do it quickly. Then, after Judas leaves, he begins to talk to the rest of the disciples and say he won't be with them very much longer. And where where he's going, they can't follow now. They'll follow later, but they can't follow now. And so that's really leading right into this. We can't really separate the two texts. Um, we've separated them by week so we can study them this way, but they flow right one into the other, because now he's talking to them about where he's going, and they're asking him questions that are really still about what he was talking about as soon as Judas left. So we have to really keep that connected. So why are their hearts troubled? Because Judas is betraying Jesus, like right now, right while it's happening, while they're talking. Jesus said, "Go and do it now. Go and do it quickly." And they're discussing the fact that Jesus is going to be leaving and they can't go with them. So 3 years, we believe, the disciples walked with Jesus and learned from Jesus, and now he's telling them that he's going away, and they're troubled. Um, so number two says, do you think that would have been troubling to you? Um, so, um, I guess the Bible study spiritual answer is no, I'd have been just fine. I'd have understood that he was doing the will of God, and I would have. Um, but I remember how troubling it was, not only to people that maybe didn't stay at our church, but to people that did stay, those of us that are still here, how troubling it was when, after almost 14 years, Pastor Bain left to go to Atlanta. And many people did not, and first of all, many people came to Christ through the ministry of Pastor Bain. So many of us didn't know another pastor. He was our pastor, I think a lot of people had not really just processed it through and realized that that does happen occasionally. Pastors are called elsewhere, and so we just imagine that he would always be our pastor, and that's easier to imagine if you've not been in the church very long and he's always been your pastor. And when you've grown significantly under someone's ministry, it's hard to believe that it could be the will of God that somebody else would be the pastor. And now we've come a long way in the last 10 years since then, and perhaps there are some people that can't imagine any different pastor than me. Um, and I'm, I understand that, but I think when we start considering it like that, and the personal relationship we build with those who disciple us, with those who teach us, and then we consider the fact that they had stepped way out, they had left everything to follow Jesus. Likely many of these disciples would not have been a disciple of anyone else, although some might have been disciples of John the Baptist who came over to Jesus. But many of them would not have been disciples of anyone else. They were back out fishing and that sort of thing, or they were collecting taxes when they began to follow Jesus, and nobody else would have had them. Nobody else would have called them. And then their method of discipleship was essentially living together, not just going to church, not just spending a few hours a week, not a couple hours in service and maybe an hour having coffee or doing Bible study with somebody. That was not their method of discipleship. Their method was living together. So then, if you were living with the person who had helped you grow in your faith the most ever, in fact, perhaps was really the only teacher you've ever had in the faith, then how troubling would it be to you in that circumstance? And then we realize perhaps we would have been troubled also. Our hearts would have been troubled like the disciples. The second part of the question is, are there other things in your life that can be troubling? And I would say there are a whole lot of things in life that are troubling. There's personal things that can be troubling, incidents, things like that. We can be troubled about our weight or our health. We can be troubled about stress and finances. We can be troubled about, things that happen. Somebody yells at us, or we get in a car accident. And we can be troubled about people that don't do what we think they should do, whether they're in our ministry under our leadership, or whether they're in our family, our kids, our sisters, our brothers, our parents, our cousins. There are people that just don't do what we think they should do, and those situations can be troubling as well. And maybe we might consider some of those things less spiritual than losing a teacher or rabbi like Jesus, who was walking beside us. But there are a lot of things that can be troubling in life. Some of them seem more spiritual. Some of them maybe seem a little more selfish. I would say that even wanting to keep Jesus, the rabbi, walking with them physically was somewhat of a selfish concern. The most troubling things to us are often selfish, and we might want to consider that as well. Number three, Why does Jesus tell his disciples not to let our hearts be troubled? And notice I said our instead of their, because I believe that he's speaking this to us just as much as he's speaking it to his 12 or to however many had gathered there that day when he was speaking, perhaps more than 12. We know that there were mentioned 100 followers at one time, and there were people following him. We don't really know exactly how many of those were gathered at this moment. We usually imagine the 12, but perhaps there were more. Um, so, so this is not asking like philosophically why Jesus would ask this. It's asking what basis does Jesus use to show them how their hearts shouldn't be troubled, or what was going to happen. Why might he say this in the current context? So these type of ideas. A says because what is about to happen is going to be easy. Don't be troubled. It's everything's going to go just fine. It's like that State Farm commercial. I'm enjoying the State Farm commercials with Jake from State Farm and Chris Paul, where he's every time he hears the music, he's worried about because everything falls apart in the State Farm commercial. Something always crashes into his car or falls somewhere, or jumps through a window and burns down his house. Um, that's been the theme. I love those commercials. They're funny to me. But now Jake from State Farm shows up and he says things are going to go surprisingly well, and so that's what A is saying. Oh, it's don't worry, it's going to go surprisingly well. It's going to be easy. That is not the basis on which Jesus is saying this. Don't let your hearts be troubled. He's not saying don't worry, it's going to work out fine. I watch some of the crime dramas and NCIS and some of those things, um, and really enjoy some of those shows. And one thing that I notice is, the bleeding heart investigator always likes to tell, the FBI ones, oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine. We're going to find them alive, that sort of thing. And sometimes they bring out that that's not a good thing to tell somebody because you can't guarantee that. But I always think it's funny that that's what they say, because you don't know that, and it could go horrible, and then you've just lied to the person. Jesus doesn't do it that way. Jesus doesn't say everything is going to go well. He says, don't let your hearts be troubled. And really what he's saying is things are going to be hard, but don't let your hearts be troubled. So B says, because they believe in God and thus can believe also in Jesus, even if they no longer see him face to face. So he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. So trust me. We talked about that a little bit this past Wednesday in our closing session. We can't always trust people, but we can trust Jesus. And sometimes the basis of being vulnerable in our life and doing the right thing and doing good to others, and remaining in relationship with others rather than building walls and setting up protection mechanisms, is not that we can trust the other person, or is not that there's some guarantee that things won't go bad. The basis on which we put ourselves in vulnerable positions in relationship and don't build walls and don't put up protection mechanisms is that we can trust God, that even if we are hurt, he will take care of us. And I think we would be more emotionally healthy, and have better relationships if we looked at at life this way, that we very well may be hurt by the people around us and by our circumstances and situations. But we can trust God that He will be with us even through the hurt. So, hurt is not a thing to be avoided at all costs. And therefore, the value of relationship is greater than the hurt that we risk by having relationship. These are things to think about. But because God has a plan, and even in the difficult time, even the difficult time that they are about to go through is a part of His plan. So He's got a plan, and He's got a way and a plan to make even the difficult time work for our good, for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. So we trust Him, not that He will protect us from all physical or emotional harm in this world, but we trust Him that whatever harm does come, He will ultimately work it for our good, for I believe, in this world and in eternity. Sometimes it's harder to see in this world, and sometimes it takes more time to see in this world, but definitely for eternity, He's working this for our good, even when harm seems to be coming in the near term. And then D, because there is something beyond this current trouble. So we are very short-sighted as humans, and we don't see beyond whatever's going on right now, and so we can not let our hearts be troubled because we know that there's something on the other side of all this, and God's working that out even when we can't see it. Number 4, what does this mean for us when we go through difficult times? First, it sounds like we will go through difficult times. I'm not sure I like that. Well, it doesn't matter if I like it or not. It's true. In fact, Jesus says, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So that's not the end of the story, is what He says. You're going to have trouble here, but it's not the end of the story. I have victory in the end. B, He makes it sound like we have a choice to not let our hearts be troubled. In other words, I think sometimes we think that our feelings and emotions are out of our control. And I would say this, that at very least, we can't always control our initial thought or emotion that just pops into our head or our heart when something happens, but we can control where we go from there. So do we let that initial thought or emotion take hold and control our actions from here out and trouble our hearts, and sort of dwell? Or are we able to take that thought captive and instead focus on a different thought, focus on a different truth, which is the truth that Jesus is in control, that He works all things for the good of those who love Him, that God knows the end of all of this, that He can, He's still working and He hasn't left us. Can we focus on those promises in the midst of the trouble rather than dwelling on our initial emotion? And that's where that initial thing jumps in, and we are tempted to go that direction, but we still have a choice. And I think that too many of us as humans are controlled by that first thought, and we believe whether that first thought is a temptation towards, for instance, lust. We feel like if that first thought is, oh, I'd like to whatever with that person, or then rather than taking that thought captive and setting that aside and saying that's not pleasing to God, I will not go down that path, and choosing to whatever is right, whatever is good, whatever. Let's dwell on these things, think on such things. Instead of choosing that, we can choose to dwell on something better, or whether that's an emotion, where we are tempted to remain in a state of depression, where we're tempted to remain in a state of despair or anger. So what do we do when that angry thought or that angry feeling jumps in our head or our heart? Do we take that captive and say, no, that's not how God would have me respond to this situation? And I'm going to pray, and I'm going to focus on Him, and I'm going to think on His promises, and I'm going to instead choose a different course of action, not just physical out here, but a different course of action in terms of what I'm going to dwell on in my heart. Or I'm going to choose not to let my heart be troubled. And so Jesus seems to indicate that if he can command us not to let our, now, let me just say this, the fact that he says, don't let your hearts, means that the default state of our heart will be troubled, particularly in times of trouble. So he doesn't say, don't get all making your heart troubled. He says, don't let it be troubled, which means if we do not act, the default will be for our hearts to be troubled, which means we must make an active choice in order for God to take control and our hearts not to be troubled, in order to dwell on something other than what the default will be. And so I just want to, in one way, I'm sort of affirming what a lot of people feel when they say sort of, I'm only human, and I'm red-blooded American man or woman, and I have these feelings and I have these thoughts, and what I do about that, and there's nothing I can do about that. I can't keep them from jumping into my mind. Let me just say this, that you may not be able to control that first thought, whatever jumps into your mind or your heart, but you can control what you dwell on. And you can control whether you let your heart be troubled or whether you decide to dwell on something else, on the promises of God and on what he has said he could do in and through that situation. So that is not a commonly taught thought. So I'm sort of affirming what probably is the default that many people feel like they're stuck in, but I'm telling you that you may not have control of that first thought, but you got control of the next thought. And I just got through reading a secular book about the way our minds work and things like that, which would seem to affirm exactly what I've just said, that we often make really poor decisions based on our first feeling or inclination, but we do have the opportunity to stop and think and change the way we act. And that's not a Christian book. It's not even talking about issues of faith or of morality at all. It's just talking about decision making. And if that book affirms the same that concept, then how much more should we believe when Jesus says that we have control over whether we let our hearts be troubled? That second thought, um, that we should believe him. We should believe him all the more. See, it sounds like the default, if we don't do anything, would be for us to be troubled, and that we might need to do something or trust, lean on, cry out to someone. So when we say do something, sometimes we think that means with our hands. But an action does not have to happen with our hands and our feet. Sometimes the do something is trust, lean on, cry out to Jesus in order to not let our hearts be troubled. So, number 5 is a self analysis question. Do you let your heart be troubled? Yes, no, explain. And I would say that if we're being honest, all of us have let our hearts be troubled. Many of us, that is a constant state that we have not seemed to have the capacity to overcome. And perhaps this is the first time we're even hearing about the possibility in the power of God to overcome the tendency to let our hearts be troubled. And so let's just be honest here. Those of us that are the most spiritual, the most mature, whatever you want to say, probably still struggle and have to fight every day to not let our hearts be troubled. So let's be honest with that, and let's talk about what we need to do in order to do better and not letting our hearts be troubled. Number 6, what does Jesus tell them in verses 2 through 4? So now we're moving on from this first statement, which was a pretty important and powerful statement by Jesus. In 2 through 4, he says, my Father's house has many rooms. So this is a part of it. He's talking about the after. We talked about this. He's talking about what is beyond this time. He's talking about what they can plan for and hope for in the future. And that is, my Father's house has many rooms. B, I'm telling you the truth. I'm going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house. So he says, if it weren't so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place? I'm going to prepare a place. I'm telling you, it's so. I'm telling you the truth. See, if I go, I promise I will come back to get you. Okay. This sounds like a mom dropping her kid off at daycare the first time. We will be back. We will come to get you. We are not leaving you forever at this daycare. We will be back. If I go, I will come back to get you, to take you to be with me where I am. And so kids, this is a really good analogy. Kids in daycare, whatever is right now seems like forever, and they think you're leaving them entirely. And until they've experienced you leaving and coming back a few times, they don't know whether to trust that that's really going to happen. And so Jesus is talking to us as adults very much the same way that parents and daycare teachers have to talk to children, because we have trouble trusting when we see him leaving us. We have trouble believing he's really going to be back to get us and take us to be where he is. D, he says, you know where the way to the place where I'm going. So he is telling them that you know the way to get there. Now, also, you might choose not to go that way, and you might not get there. That's implied in his statement. Now, Thomas says, we don't even know where you're going. This is number 7. What does Thomas say to Jesus in response to this? We don't even know where you're going. How can we know the way? We don't know the way, Jesus. What are you going to drop breadcrumbs? We don't know. And Jesus is saying, oh, man. Number 8, how does Jesus answer? A, let me give you some step-by-step instructions. That's what we all want, isn't it? We want, this is what you need to do and you'll get there. But he doesn't do that. He says, I am the way. He says, the way, I've been with you 3 years. I've taught you, you know me. I'm still going to be present with you in a different way, and you can still know me, and I am the way. The way is not a list of step-by-step instructions. It's to follow me, have relationship with me, do as I call you to do, and that is the way to be with me where I am. If you go a different way, if you don't do the things that I've called you to do, if you don't walk with me, you'll end up somewhere else. And I know in the church we have this struggle back and forth between what seem like extremes to some people, between grace, which we sometimes interpret as a greasy grace, and you're just going to be able to be saved no matter what happens and no matter what you do, and you're just forgiven. You can't earn grace. You don't deserve grace. Between that extreme and a works righteousness that suggests that whatever you do, that's how you earn your salvation. But the truth is, neither of those extremes fully uh, comprehend the plan that Jesus has. So he has given us grace that we did not deserve. And when we take that grace and put that grace in our lives into action, then we walk with him and we get to where he's going. I've used an example, when we had some of our meals for our folks out on the street and our families that are in need. I said, we like the grace where, you're giving a meeting, you're giving a meal. Can you come and drop that off at my house? And we love the kind of thing where it's a free gift and I don't have to do anything for it. Now, the opposite end of that is, okay, come and work for a day and then buy your meal. That's, a works righteousness, if you will. You get the gift if you work for it. But what Jesus is saying is really more of a, like we do at our events, here's the meal. You don't have to do anything to get it except for come here. The meal is here. This is where I'm offering it. Oh, can you bring it to me? No, it's here. Come here, and you can take it for free. And that's the way salvation is. We don't have to do anything to earn our salvation. However, salvation is found in Christ, which means we need to go to Christ. We need to go to him and we need to walk with him. He is the way. And if we don't go to him, we say, no, can you just, actually, Jesus, I don't want to go over there with you. Will you just bring it over here? And he says, no, I already brought it to earth. I already came down. I already did all that. Here it is. You've got to walk with me. You've got to follow me. And I'll show you. It's really, salvation is more like walking through a forest with many, many dangers, and the salvation is that we can follow our guide through the forest, and he will be with us, show us the way, protect us from dangers, protect us from the mountain lions or pumas or whatever there are, and the vipers and all the things that are out there, protect us from falling down a cliff. He will show us the way. Okay. For us to sit in the middle of the forest and say, Jesus, take me out of the forest, just lift me and sort of transport me. No, I'm showing you the way through the forest. This world is a forest with many dangers, and salvation is yes, life with him on the other side, but it's also him showing us the way to that life through the forest, and we've got to follow him through it. Number 9 says, what does Jesus tell his disciples I didn't say this. C says in number 8, if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. So they have that discussion. We don't just show us God. He says, no, if you know me, I'm in him, he's in me. If you know me, you know him. And so that was why at the beginning of the Gospel of John, John tells us in the beginning was the Word, and he uses that logos metaphor, which means Jesus is the very expression of God to his people. God has shown himself to us in Christ. God has spoken to us in Christ. And so if you know Jesus, you know the Father. And that's how we get to the Father, through him. Number 9, what does Jesus tell his disciples in verse 12? Whoever believes will do. And that's very connected to James saying, faith without works is dead. He says, you believe in God, great. The demons say they believe in God too, and they tremble. But If you believe, but you don't act on that belief, it's not real belief. Show me your belief without doing anything. Everybody's just sitting there with the mouth hanging open. No, you can't show it without doing something. So how do I know you really believe? Because you act on that belief, and it shows that you really believe it. When I was in my doctoral program, we read a book, which is a challenging book about worldview. And worldview is, how do we look at the world? What's the problem with the world? What's the solution? Every person, every individual has their own worldview. Religions and cultures have a tendency to influence that worldview or create sort of groups of worldviews that are very, very similar, but each person has their own worldview. How do I look at the world? What's the problem? What's the solution? What should I do in response to that? What is going on with the world, and how should we live in it? Obviously, Christianity has a worldview, or at least a group of worldviews that are somewhat similar, because we believe sort of in one origin of the world, and one problem, sin in the world, and one solution, Jesus, in the world. But obviously also with the number of different theologies and things like that, there are variations in every person. But one of the things, the author of this book actually came to speak to our class, and one thing that he said is, and it said it in the book as well, is your worldview is not what you say it is. Your belief system is not what you say it is, it's what you act on. So your true beliefs, what you really believe, is what you act on. If you act on something other than what you say is your belief, then that betrays a difference between what you say you believe and what you really believe, because what you really believe drives your actions. And that is also what Jesus says, what James says, who was teaching the teachings of Jesus. What you really believe is what you act on. Faith without works is dead. So Jesus says, whoever believes will do. Anyone who believes in me will do the things that I've been doing, he says. Just in case you thought I made that up. That's what he says. Whoever believes in me will do the things I've been doing, even greater things. B, he is Jesus and we can't do what he's done. But if we believe, that will be enough. No, that is not right. That does not match up with what Jesus said in this passage and what the other answers say. C, if we believe, we will do the works that Jesus has been doing. D, if we believe, we will do even greater works than Jesus did because he went to be with the Father. He also says that. E, we can do even greater works than he did because he does what we ask in his name. So he says, anything you ask in my name, I'll do it. I'm not gone. If I go, I'm not gone. I will do what you ask in my name. So there's a power that he had that is available to us through prayer. Very important. Through prayer. When we ask in his name, things, the ability to do great things is available to us. We don't believe that we can do great things, so we don't try and we don't ask. We don't pray. And then our prophecy is a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, because we didn't believe it, we didn't act on it, we didn't ask, and therefore we don't do anything great. And you want to know why most Christians do not live a victorious life? It's because they don't believe it's even possible. Therefore, they don't try and they don't ask God for help. They don't ask in Jesus' name. And if they did believe, then they would try and they would ask for his help. And then they would be surprised at how many great things they could do, how much further they could go in their faith. Number 10, What kinds of things are you doing in faith? I'm not talking about the things that you're doing in your own strength. I'm saying, what kinds of things are you doing that you know you couldn't do on your own, but because Jesus said you could do things that he was doing and even greater things, you have trusted in him, believed that what he said is true, believed in him, and tried something, asked him for help, and done something that you knew you couldn't do on your own, but you were able to do by faith in him. This is an important question because most Christians do not have an answer to that question because they have never tried anything that they don't think they could do on their own because they don't really believe in Jesus. Ouch. They don't really believe in Jesus because Jesus says this, and they don't believe that he said it, that he meant what he said when he said it, that it's really true. Okay? Or if we did believe it, then we would be doing great things that we can't do on our own. So can you name one thing in your life that you have done recently? Don't tell me about 30 years ago, that you've done recently that you could not do on your own because you took a step of faith and trusted Jesus when he called you out of your comfort zone into something difficult. Name one thing, please. Name one thing. And if you can't, prayer of repentance. If you can't, God help us, we have not truly believed in him. If you can't name one thing, now's the time to ask him for forgiveness and for help to do the thing that you probably already know he's asked you to do. Which means if you already know he's asked you to do it and you've not done it because you don't have faith, then you are in disobedience, and that is sin. And by the way, it's the reason that the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, because they saw giants in the land and they didn't believe that they could take the land, even though God told them they could. And they did not, that whole generation did not enter the promised land except for Joshua and Caleb, who were the two spies that did believe. They're the only ones who entered the promised land. Excuse me. So you are not seeing God's promised land. You are not seeing all of God's promises for your life if you are not stepping out in faith to do the things that you can only do by his power. If you're just doing things that you think you can do on your own, you are not entering the promised land. And I might be talking about heaven, but I might also be talking about his promises here on earth. The second part, are there things that you are not doing because you think it's impossible? This is a corollary to that question, very, very closely related. And the third part, do you think this could be the kind of thing that Jesus would have done, or may even be greater things than that he said we could do? So all of that's just trying to walk us through that idea that if God's calling us to something impossible, we need to consider that he wants us to do it and he has the power for us to do it. And if we haven't chosen to do it, then we're in disobedience and we're not living a life of faith. And that is a good place for us to stop and pray and ask for God's help and find, though, maybe it's just one thing right now, that one step we can take into a life of faith.